Before we start, I think Dimple would like to share a few words about something very interesting that the INDIC Academy is doing. And Words Count is really proud to be associated with them from the beginning. And we really support the kind of encouragement they provide writers. And Dimple, if you'd like to take a few minutes.
Namaste, everyone. It's an absolute delight to be here with you all. On behalf of INDIC Academy, I would like to felicitate Advaita and the team for conducting this wonderful event. INDIC Academy, as some of you might know, is a non-profit, and we take pride in stating our mission, that is to bring an intellectual, cultural, and spiritual renaissance. We actually try and help public intellectuals to discover the potential that is within them and help them into transforming themselves into people who can be influencers, who get to do what is their inherent skill, or the thing that they really feel is their swadharma. That is what we are all about. And we actually do this in multiple ways. The idea is to preserve, protect, and promote Indic civilizational thought and ethos. To this effect, we have different ways. We have platforms, we have centers, and we have networks. I am a part of the Center for Indic Writers from INDIC Academy. We are the ones who've curated this panel of authors. So what we do essentially is to bring to the fore Indic writers. Something about it, I believe that there is a lot of space for people who believe in the Indic civilizational ethos, who are emotionally and spiritually connected to the unending civilization that we have inherited over thousands of years, who believe that the idea of India might be 70 years old, but Bharat has been going on perpetually. Sanatan hai ye. That is what we believe. So there are people who have something to talk about. There are people who have thoughts, but perhaps they do not have access. Because of late, we would have seen that, people who get published, they may or may not have something original. They may or may not emotionally connect with our civilizational ethos, but by virtue of the fact that they know who they know, they get published, they are seen at various events, they hog the limelight at award shows. We do not know the numbers that they sell. We do not know the popularity from readers. And this is kind of ironical because we belong to a civilization wherein if we look at the writers who have really succeeded, or authors whose work has pervaded across centuries, are the ones who were uncommon people but who lived as commoners. Sacred text, for example, Ramayana, Mahabharata, was composed by people who were not the ones with access. And we have always venerated them. That is the reason that the entire inspiration, the message of those texts has percolated over centuries. When we talk about Tulsidas, when we talk about Valmiki, Vedvyas, they were uncommon people, gifted people who believed in something and who had the potential of inspiring not just their peers, but generations over, generations over centuries, over millennia actually. So we have essentially, as a civilization, always revered what has been said, what is being said, instead of who has said it. And through Center for Indic Writers, we want to actually continue that. People who have an original thought, people who do not have the means to be heard, but they have the potential to create something which is original, which can inspire, and which can actually further the cause of our civilization. Those are the kind of people we are looking at. We are trying to encourage, identify, promote, mentor, publish, give grants to, and bring them to the masses. In this regard, we already have brought we have brought actually 6 new authors to the light. Recently, there were 2 works of fiction, one on 2611, one on the urban axle phenomenon, a fictional book by Dr. Abhishek Banerjee, who's an assistant professor in IISc. The book on 2611 was written by Lieutenant Colonel Manish Jetli, an ex-army man. A book of satire by a technology guy in English. Another one by somebody who's again a technology professional but writes wonderful Hindi satire in the same vein as Srilal Shukla or Sharad Joshi. So these are the people who we encourage to move from just tweeting to actually penning columns. We enable them to get published across various portals, and in the few of whom who had the discipline and who had the zeal to actually complete a manuscript, we handheld them till the stage of publication. And because we wanted to keep the turnaround cycle smaller, we decided to give them publishing grants and help them through some strategic alliances that we have. So 4 new authors already there. And it's not just new authors that we are working for. We already have something called as an INDIC author network, which comprises of around 50 members now. Some of them, rather all of them here, are a part of INDIC author network. So we have existing authors, we have upcoming authors, we have self-publishing authors who have moved to traditional, we have traditional authors who've always been there and popular. We try and ensure that it is the author who is at our focus. We're not just looking at the book, because when we look at the publisher is interested in selling the book. We are interested in getting the author connected to the reading audience. We are a non-profit. We do not have a corpus, so we use innovative ways, be it conducting certain events through book tours, book launches at various places. We have done quite a few events, in fact, in Pune. There was one in Crossword where Sanjeev Sanyal had an interaction. Mayuresh had another interaction. This evening, we will have a book unveiling of Shefali Vaidyaji's debut book in Marathi. So these are the ways we try and ensure that the audiences get to hear new voices and fresh voices. What we expect from the audience is to show up. Because all of this, what we do, is all volunteer-driven. Our motivation also needs an energy shot. If you don't show up, if you don't come, if you don't listen to them, if you don't buy their books, if you don't give the feedback, because right now we are living in this world of social media, everything is online. Digital ensures there is direct connect. So the more you read, review, recommend their work, the more you come back to us, giving us insights, inputs, the better we will be able to perform. We have placed the books of all of these authors outside. I would definitely appreciate if towards the end of the session, you go back with those books and let us know how you found them. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think Dimple said so much that had to be said that I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but we'll find something. I know you came off a very fiery session earlier where there were many concepts of civilization spoken about. There's going to be one after this, which is all about news, which is again bound to be fiery. So we're the kind of civilizational hiatus here, where we will talk about calm things like writing and producing creative work and so on, is what I had thought. Except that I have come here to realize that we are back in civilizational conflict. We're talking about Indic civilizations, Indic writing, and the word Indic, to my mind, is not equivalent to Hindu, right? It includes a lot more. But I realized as you were talking that all the things that you were saying led back to a certain tradition of civilization, which was very clearly a Hindu-led civilization. So you don't get to say anything about that anymore. We will talk about other things, but one realizes that whether it's writing or publishing or anything else that one does these days, the question goes back again and again and again to positions on where we are within this democracy of ours. What is the position we wish to take? What is it that we would like others to see us taking? And somewhere in between, I think, is this idea of writing across. Some of you write columns, some of you write blogs, all of you write books, and I get to publish them. And that's the other element of subversion I realized I was going to be part of, which is she has just told us that publishers do all the wrong things. They publish people who don't deserve to be published. They publish people who are only published because they know X, Y, Z. And I'd like to stand up for publishers and say we're not all bad. We do publish some good books as well. And one consequence of that, of our being good enough, is that some of you have moved from being self-published to also being published by traditional publishers. So let's understand from our panel their own journeys, how they got to writing, what they write, why they write. And I'd really like to understand the way in which you decided to take your content to the reader? Did you decide to take it in terms of blogs and personal writing? Did you decide to do columns in newspapers and magazines where you would be read by a certain kind of readership? Or did you choose the far more niche, actually the more niche way, which is to publish traditionally and have books which people actually have to buy? They do not get it free as something that you wake up to on your Twitter timeline or your Facebook or any such thing. You have to invest in that act of putting money out there, choosing which one you want to buy, and then going out and actually reading it all. So that is a very different way of communicating to your readers. So where should we begin? The gentleman on the panel? Shall we give him the first chance?
Gentleman first.
Okay, gentleman first. Let's go.
Hi everyone. Thank you. So in my case, I think that the choice that you talked about was very simple, because the writing that I do is fairly compartmentalized. So whenever I have, and I have a rule about not mixing the two of them. So whenever I have something to say about the civilizational, economical, socio-political issue, I go to one of the platforms that publish me and I write an article for them. And in a way, I prefer writing an article for a platform rather than writing for my own blog, because there is an editorial input which automatically goes in. And fortunately for me, I have worked with editors like R. Jagannathan of Swarajya, who always provide the kind of balance which is required very often for my kind of writing. So my non-fiction writing is fairly combative. So you would require somebody to sort of provide some kind of a balance. As an idea, I think it's a bad idea for writers to use fiction to get their political point across. And for the simple reason being that most of them are unsuccessful. So my favorite writer is Stephen King, who writes a lot of horror and supernatural novel. And yet, out of the 70-odd books that he has written, every time he has written an overtly political book, he has ended up making it either very dull or very preachy. So if somebody of his obvious qualities and capabilities cannot pull it off after 40 years of experience, probably a newbie like me would prefer to stay out of that.
Mayuresh, give them a context of your writing, because you write in a very unusual genre for India, which is horror. I mean, you also write horror. How does someone like you, who is involved in writing columns and so on, decide that in fiction you want to use the mode of genre of horror and thrillers and so on?
I think it is more of a function of what you read. So when I started reading, most of the writers that I read were either from horror. So like I said, Stephen King is a big favorite. Ray Bradbury is another. There is a person called Dean Koontz. So I have read a lot of books written by these people. In Marathi, actually, there were two authors, one called Mr. Narayan Dharap and other called Dapa Khambete, who used to write these horror fictions, horror short stories from a long time. So I have been reading those since my childhood. In psychological...
So this is horror written and published in magazines in Marathi?
No. So they are published writers. So they have published novels as well as short stories in Marathi. And then the second genre, obviously, like people like Jonathan Kellerman, Dennis Lehane, Michael Connelly, they write psychological thriller. So most of the time, I think most of fiction writing begins as an act of imitation. So imitation is the best form of flattery. So you start writing saying that, okay, I want to write like him, I want to write something like him, and then you start writing. And over a period of time, if you find your voice, then you realize that you have a talent for it. If you don't find your voice, you realize that you are sort of not made up for that. Fortunately for me, I realized that I have found my voice and then moved on.
Okay, we'll come back to that. No, you don't get to speak. Hold on. No. We're going to keep her quiet, right, for a while. I'll come back to you, Dimple. Sai, you tell us.
There's a lot of journey to cover, and it's a privilege to share it with you all. So can I start from my first book? So my first book, Abhaya, which is based on the episode of Narakasura Vadha from Bhagavatam, it was inspired by a conversation I had with a Muslim friend of mine. Yeah, in grassroots, we discuss things very openly across religions. That's the real idea. So she was asking me, why does Lord Krishna have so many wives, and why do you guys worship such a person? And I was like, okay, how come she doesn't know it? And narrated to her the entire story of Narakasura Vadha, where Narakasura had imprisoned 16,000 maidens, and Lord Krishna killed him, rescued them, and married them so that they don't face social social stigma. And she was like, why don't we get to hear such stories? Okay, you heard it now, but the conversation stayed with me, and I really wanted to write something from the perspective of a princess or a girl who was, imprisoned by Narakasura, and her journey of understanding Krishna. The conversation stayed for very long. This happened when I was in high school. And finally, when I left my first job, I got back to my passion and wrote the first book, wrote it as a novel. And like many writers do, I hired an agent who wanted me to change a lot of my book to the extent that it was not my story, which is when I decided there is a wonderful tool called Kindle Direct Publishing on Amazon. So I put my book out there, and coincidentally, I was a part of Center for INDIC Writers, where I was not at all expecting much support when I became a part of it, because everybody was an established writer, and I was even kind of hesitant to talk about my book. And within a week of my publishing, there was a tweet saying, really enjoying reading Abhaya by Saiswaroopa. It is a story about a princess set in the Mahabharata era. And guess the name of the gentleman who tweeted that? It's Amish Tripathi. So that's the sort of encouragement I got from Center for INDIC Writers. So thank you, Dimple. And then there was no looking back. I treat each of my books, though they are set in the Puranic universe or the Vedic universe, as a writer, I believe each book should present a challenge to me as a writer, and I have to overcome that challenge. As a storyteller and as a writer, I have to overcome that. So I explored different themes. Like my second book, Avishi, it was based on a Rigvedic heroine called Vishpala, and sadly that's something which we don't celebrate as we should celebrate. She is a queen, a warrior who existed in very ancient Rigvedic times, who lost her leg in a battle, and who got a prosthetic metal leg fixed by the Ashwini Kumaras and fought the battle. I mean, how's that for science and imagination? And sad that we don't speak about it, and sadder that I found her name being mentioned by medical journals discussing prosthesis, happening somewhere in Israel, US, and we don't talk about it. And it was a great challenge to recreate or reimagine the universe of Rigveda. It is even much more different from the society of Mahabharata that we see. Vedvyas ji made it a lot easier for a lot of writers by creating a whole universe, by documenting the whole universe of that time. But Rigvedic universe was, even challenging to do that. So I had to refer a lot of bits and pieces, even draw from a little bit from the Greek civilization, from their architecture and in perspective. And that was my challenge. And again, with a great support from friends and already established readership, it sold, and I could sell the screen adaptation rights for Avishi. And that was when my publisher, Rupa Publications, approached me with a topic to write. And that was one defining moment of my life, that a self-published author can get the attention of a traditional publisher. And a traditional publisher is proactive enough to look at at writers who promise talent. And that was why I decided to believe in them. And you can find my book Draupadi in the stalls. You please check it out. And that's my journey till now.
Okay. Thank you. You obviously enjoy your entire writing process very much. It shows on your face and in your words. Shefali, shall we talk about your work? And you're primarily a columnist, but now you've got a book out as well.
Yeah.
And you write in Marathi and in English.
And Konkani and Spanish.
And Konkani and Spanish, okay. So tell us a little bit about that, about your movement from columnist to writer.
See, it's a very perilous thing to speak at a 2 afternoon 2 session in Pune, because as you all know, everybody in Pune sleeps from 2 to 4. So it's going to take a lot of effort to keep the audience awake, but I hope that my story will keep them awake. I started writing in Marathi when I was in college. I used to work for newspapers even when I was studying. But I was basically a columnist, and I used to write about a lot of things that interested me, which included temples, textiles, travel, even back then, but very little politics, even though I had opinions. I was always opinionated. But somewhere around the time, then life took me, I did my mass communication, worked in television for a while, worked with various media outfits in content. And then life took me outside India, where I was a trailing spouse. Then I got pregnant with triplets. Then I took a long break because I was going to raise my kids. And then when I wanted to come back when my kids were a little older, I found social media as a wonderful medium where I could express myself without the pressure of deadlines, without the pressure of anybody gatekeeping what I'm writing. And I could write whatever I wanted to say, and I could get it across to people. That's how I started writing about politics. And I suddenly found that there is a huge demand for the kind of writing that I was writing, because a lot of people told me, yes, this is what we feel too, but we are not able to express it as well as you are. So thank you for saying it for us. So that's how I started writing. And then I graduated to columns as my children got older and I got a little more time. And meanwhile, I continued to write in Marathi, and my Marathi writing is very different from political writing. I write what is known as Lalit. Lalit is like non-fiction, and it is about softer topics like parenting, like travel, like textiles, like people. So I did a lot of that, and I still do a lot of that. I write columns for Marathi newspapers. And I wrote a column for 2 years for a Goan newspaper called Ghara Hindate Akashi. It was about my parenting experiences, parenting triplets. It was not so much about what I can tell people about parenting, but it was more like what I learned through trial and error, and mostly through my children. And that column was very, very well received. And a traditional publisher actually approached me, and they said they really liked my work. And Indrayani Publication, it's a very old publication firm in Maharashtra, but it's being run by a young couple these days. And they approached me, and that's how this book happened. But I am very happy that this book happened, because I was very clear. I have multiple books inside me because I write on a lot of topics. But I was very clear that my first book had to be in Marathi, because that's my language. And my first book had to be about parenting. Because I write about temples sometimes, I write about politics sometimes, I write about textiles sometimes, but I am a parent all the time. It is not something that I retire from, it is not something that I intend to retire from, and it is, my children are my life. Obviously, any mother will tell you that. So my parenting and my being a mother and the experience that I learned from my children, I felt that maybe they will help somebody. And when I wrote about my parenting blog, that's where this book was born out of, a lady actually reached out to me, and I had written about postpartum depression that I had gone through. And it was very painful, and it took me, I think, almost 6 years to even write about it. But when I wrote a blog post about it, a woman reached out to me and she said, you know what, I read your column at the right time. I was considering suicide because I couldn't handle this, and I read your column, and thank you for giving me the courage to face, she had twins. Thank you for giving me the courage to face this, and because of your blog, I have the courage that I can be a good parent too. And I think that is one of the biggest compliments I have ever received, that your words actually have the power to pull somebody from the brink. A lot of books have done it for me, so I am happy that I could pay back in some time. About the other things, I do a lot of talks on Goan history. I am writing a book about Goan history and about what it means to me, today's Goan, to go back in history and how do I deal with it. So it's kind of like a travelogue, it's kind of like a memoir. But that book will happen slowly. I also write satire. So I could write another book which is called Bude Lachar Shair Ki Atmakatha. But you will need to wait for it. There will be many more books as such. But I am glad. For me, the biggest problem was, it is both a problem and a strength, is that I write on multiple topics and I write in multiple languages. So it's very difficult for me to sit down and finish a project. So I have multiple book proposals in my mind, I have multiple book proposals on paper, but actually sitting down and working at it is something that I find difficult. So that blank page to the book part, that is, blank page to 35 pages I can do. 35 pages to 250 pages, it takes a lot of time. Probably also because I'm a Goan, so you can take out a Goan from Goa, but you can't really take Goa out of a Goan. So I'm very laid back. I cannot deal with, for example, Dimple's speed, so I work at my own speed.
Sorry, before I get to Kavita, can I just ask one more question? Because you were talking about multiple languages. Do you think a certain kind of idea works better in a particular language? How do you decide what goes into which language? Which of your ideas?
Not really. I write about travel a lot in both languages, in actually 3 languages. And they're not translations. Sometimes I write about the same theme in 3 languages, but they're never translations. So every language has its own flavor. And I cannot explain it. So sometimes when I start writing, it comes out in English first. Sometimes it comes out in Marathi first. Sometimes it comes out in Konkani first. So it is totally at that moment what I am feeling. And I am perfectly multilingual, even though I say so myself. So it's very difficult for me to choose. And sometimes I feel that, okay, this English article has turned out very good, so maybe I should do a Marathi version of it. Not a translation, but a Marathi version of it. For example, I'd written a story in Marathi about, it was a non-fiction, it was more about, loosely based on my husband's and my daily idiosyncrasy. He's extremely neat, I'm not, that kind of a thing. It turned out very beautiful in Marathi, and I thought that it should be turned into, it would translate well into English. I wrote an English version of it that was also very, very popular. It got something like, I think, 10,000 likes or something like that on Facebook alone. So it totally depends on what the mood is and what I'm feeling and what language at that point of time is in my head, really.
Thank you. Kavita, tell us about your journey.
Okay, I think this whole topic about blank page to getting printed, I think it was never a blank page for me because I was in the media, so there were words, words and words. But I think after 20 years, I had got a little bored, I was a little stagnated, and I said, okay, I think every journalist wants to write a book. So I said, chalo, kitab likhte hai. And I wrote my first book, which was on Kannada. And that, fortunately for me, I think it became a huge hit. And I think that is very important when we are talking about, everyone writes books, but I think books have to be read. I think the entire crucial factor is that if your book is read, then I think the author gets a certain, not only a satisfaction, it is also a fact that he can negotiate his position or her position with the reader as well as the publisher. So I think the success of the first book is extremely important. And I think I was very lucky about that. And I think at a trot, I gave about 5 books in 5 years. So it was like, it almost became like a job. So after journalism, I was writing books. And even after, I think, 5 books, the same question, I keep getting those 2 questions. One is, why did you write on mythology? And the second is on women. Why do you always write on women? I think I'll answer the second first. Women, yes, because I think most of you would agree women are more interesting than men. At least I find them. And it started off with that. And it happened actually by default because Karna's wife was a success. Then I wrote on Urmila, which actually no one knew about. They knew her as Lakshman's wife. No one knew her as Sita's sister. So the book was called Sita's Sister, and I think that's how the curiosity level sort of got ratcheted. And then I started, while I was doing my research, I realized we see mythology completely through the men's side. We never ever see mythology through the women's side. And I think that is where everything changes. The plot remains the same, and the narrative changes. So I think that is exactly where mythology, it comes to the first question, why I chose mythology. Because I think mythology gives me that liquid medium. It is extremely dynamic. It's a very creative canvas. I don't think it's as limiting as a historical fiction. Mythological fiction is because mythology itself, the whole idea of mythology is it's not telling stories about gods and goddesses and magic or whatever. Mythology actually is a very wrong word for this, because I would say when we are writing, we are talking, actually we are going back to the ancient text and we are referring to our Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are actually literary epics. They are epics. They are literary pieces which have huge philosophical content. So from there, that exactly gives it the depth and the liquidity. The whole thing of why is it so liquid? Why is it existed for so many thousands of years? Because of its dynamism, because it has been revised, it has been looked. We are not retelling a story. It is, when I am writing about an Urmila or a Surpanaka or a Satyavati, I am not retelling her story. I am sort of telling a story about a marginal character which might have been overlooked. How much do we know about a Surpanaka? How much do we know about a Satyavati? The thing is revising it, because I think mythology gives, it is a sort of a platform where you can portray contemporary ideas also. Because after a point, when we say why do we identify with the Mahabharata? Because it's all about the universal emotions. It is about universal dilemmas. It is about universal conflicts. Because mythology actually deals with man. It's not about gods at all. It's about man and his conflicts. His inner conflicts, basically his inner conflicts. And of course, you have the wars. You have the soldiers. You have the Rajas and the Ranis and the queens. But these are all metaphorical. I mean, that is exactly why mythology is so layered. And peeling off the layers, I think that is what makes. And I think when people ask me that, I think since we are writing in English now, I think we are sort of waking up to the fact that, okay, people are writing on mythology and they are retelling the story. But no, when you're in vernacular literature or regional literature, it's always been there. Mythology is a literary device for a writer. It is actually one way of showing. We are talking about not only the characters, we are talking about the entire socio-political, economic situation of that time. And it's not question, we can't compare those norms to ours, but the fact remains that there are certain threads which are still present now. The whole thing about the jealousy between siblings or disappointment in love, all the conflicts, all the dilemmas which are there. And the moment you read them and reread them, you find different layers. So I think this whole thing on mythology and women, I think I enjoy it. And when people say, do you want to change the genre? I said, no, not yet. I think it's still huge.
Kavita, do you think there's too much of it happening? Every second writer you come across is trying to go back to the past and retell that story or recreate it or whatever you say. Some of them have been enormously successful. You spoke about Amish, you yourself. Writers who've actually done extremely well. And then every other book that does that and does not manage to make that, breakthrough into successful mode, what is it that allows some retellings to work and the other retellings to not?
I think the reader would be the best person to answer this, actually, because that is what, our entire identity or entire success depends on the reader. And what you write, if it does not appeal to the reader, it does not really go forward. You're talking about, there are a lot of authors, yes, but if you actually see, each of them have their own interpretation. They have their own POV. And I think that is very important. That is a crucial factor. What is your POV? By default, it happened that I started writing about women and marginal characters, so it became a niche in itself. It was not a deliberate decision. It happened, but it also, after each book, I think it's also a progression of the author. So when you're talking about why one author that's what actually you asked, why one author is doing well and the other is not. I think in the end, an author has to have his own personality in writing. And I think that should appeal to the reader. And if it is there, I'm quite sure my reader is her reader also. See, the readers are also very circumspect. They know they are going to read the different authors. It's not that my readers I have got a fan following which are only reserved for me. No, they are called mythology writers. They are mythology lovers. So they are going to try out all the authors and they'll choose the best, whom they like. So a person who doesn't like my writing, they say, oh, too much about women, I don't like it. I can be dismissed that way also. So I think it actually completely depends on the reader.
Okay. Let's leave that thought there with the mythology and the kind of writing you do. Shall we go back to talking about the new thing, which is digital publishing? And Mayuresh has been working, his books have moved into digital platforms as much as into physical. So mythology and mythological writing, I think, has benefited greatly from this new technology of ebooks and reading outside of the traditional market, while it has also been the biggest propeller of sales in non-metro cities and towns and smaller places where books were not available. It was mythology that broke through, I think, whether it was Chetan Bhagat's contemporary mythology or Amish's past mythology. But these stories really took books to other places. And then came the next step, which is your digital reading and Kindle and ebooks and so on. So I'm torn between seeing this as a great revolutionary moment in our history, because I see the figures and I see that India continues to read physical books way more than they read and consume ebooks. So if you were going to look at figures, you might find that an average book, maybe 7 to 8% of your sales are coming from ebooks. 90 to 95% reading is still happening with the physical book in hand. So clearly we haven't gone the US way or even the UK way, which is still 25% of the market. But you stepped into that territory and you took your books to a digital publisher. What has your experience been of that market?
I think there is enough market for all kind of readers. So that is one of the reasons why the publisher that I work with, Juggernaut, they have people, best-selling authors also publishing through that platform, which means that people can actually read books of those best-selling authors on their mobile phones and tablets. More interestingly, I think it has opened more possibilities for you for the kind of fiction that you want to write. So there was a time, so interestingly, about a year back when we did a book launch for Sanjeev Sanyal for his short stories, I was talking to him, I was moderating that panel. And Sanjeev, we were generally talking about death of short stories, so to say. So all of us who grew in the 80s and 90s, we ended up reading a ton of fiction in the forms of short stories, because there were good authors writing short stories in the 3 languages. So I used to read in 3 languages, Marathi, Hindi and English. All 3 languages would have good authors writing short stories. So, but in the last 10 to 12 years, maybe between 2000 to 2010, most of those authors either made a transitions to being novelists or they ended up getting into some other form, like maybe writing for screen or something like that. Now, when you have, there is a very practical problem. When you write an 8,000 word short story, which is a 32-page draft, you cannot really put in a commercial effort of printing a 32-page paperback and expect to market it at a price, at a price point where it will make sense for a reader to spend money on a short story. But on the other hand, you can take that same short story, put it on an app and say that, okay, pay 10 rupees or 5 rupees and read that. And then suddenly you're in business. So I did 5 short stories and 2 novels on Juggernaut, and a lot of people reached out. So in fact, in terms of number, I think my first novel, The Dark Road, that remained the highest read among those 7 things. But I think the short stories did exceptionally well. And without that platform of digital reading, I don't think it would have been possible for me to, maybe I could have published them in a magazine, or maybe I could have put them up in a blog, but nothing more than that. But today, because of digital publishing, this entire new tradition of this short story can get revived. Now, similarly, for a couple of novels, they also did an experiment of serialized kind of novels. So I don't know, people who used to read magazines like Chandoba and Chanda Mama in our childhood. So we used to have these serialized books or serialized stories where it would keep on coming in edition. And in fact, now that is something which now I am exploring. Can I write a story which will be published in, say, 10 or 12 installments, and people can sort of actually anticipate that when the next edition will come out. So I think these are more interesting possibilities. One of the reasons why I think probably the numbers don't support that, only that 7 or 8%, is I think the revolution of mobile phone or the smartphone revolution is really happening in the rural and sub-metro kind of area, where English reading itself is not very popular. So tomorrow, for example, Juggernaut also publishes in Hindi, and I would be actually very interested in knowing what are their sales figures in Hindi. Because those are the places where consumption in the local language is extremely high. So tomorrow, if we have a digital platform which is solely catering to regional languages, it would be very interesting to see if it sort of revives the market.
I think what we're seeing is that the mobile phone is being used way more for video and audio content than
for making phone calls.
Yeah, than reading books. But maybe the audio book is the other next step arriving, because then
I'll tell
you
you
can listen to stories at least.
My problem with audiobooks is actually time. Because audiobooks, I mean, either you need to, unless and until you are in a chauffeur-driven car kind of a situation and have long travels, I really don't know where I'll take out the time to sort of listen and do something else at the same time. I mean, yeah, maybe for 45 minutes, if you walk the treadmill, you can do that. But then, really, is that what you want to do? So, ideally speaking, if the idea of reading fiction is immersion, getting lost into that world, do you really want to do that when you're running on treadmill or driving your car? Or, I mean, I tried...
You just shut your eyes, lie in bed and listen to an audiobook.
Okay, I find that impossible to do so.
Fine. Does anyone else have experience of publishing as on the e-platform, self-publishing, etc.? It'd be nice to know what you...
Yes, so 3 of my books have been exclusively on Kindle Direct Publishing. What I have realized is that, and I noticed that the readers are really loyal because a reader who reads on a Kindle or on a phone or a tablet, any digital media, consumes a lot of content. Basically, because the fonts are easy, the lighting, and he or she can carry all the books with him wherever he goes. It's not, we don't really have to carry a bag full of books everywhere. So, and basically, for a normal reader to buy a print book, I'm just mentally recounting. He or she hears about a book through a friend or through a media article. Then he mentally makes note of it to buy the book. Then he finds time to visit a store. Then then there's a probability of finding or not finding that book. Once they check out the price, whether they want to spend or not, and the reader can turn back at any point. But here, when I push a link and say, download and start reading right now, a lot of obstacles that exist in the physical world don't exist here. And that's exactly why I feel it's easier to sell digital content. Yes, the spread or the penetration is quite low now, which may be a positive thing for us because we have a large untapped market.
Yes, that's one way to look at it, absolutely.
I just want to add to Mayuresh's point of regional languages. See, I wouldn't say a problem, but a minor grip with LitFest, most of them, or any discussion related to literature in India these days, it is too English-centric. There is hardly any notice of what is the younger generation writing in other languages. I write a lot in Marathi, I read a lot in Marathi, and I see a lot of fresh content, lot of fresh themes being included in the literature. And some of these people have actually moved from Facebook posts to proper books by traditional publishers. And the books are doing phenomenal. I mean, there is amazing satire. There is the rural Marathi, what you call Gramin Sahitya, which is doing really well. It is today's generation talking about it. So this is a huge audience out there, which we are completely excluding in these little gatherings because we are totally only focusing on English. I would say that there is far more freshness and far more robustness in Indian language literature than Indian writers writing in English. Maybe I'm biased, but that is my opinion.
No, I think you're absolutely right. From any point of view, I was in Trivandrum, just Thiruvananthapuram, for the last 2 days at a literary festival that the Mathrubhumi Media House runs. And for once, there was a festival where there was absolute parity. It was not as though the Malayalam writers were in any way secondary to the conversation. It was on par. It was there was no discrimination of any sort, and you felt completely involved in both sets of conversations because both involved the reader. We're all bilingual at least now. So you're absolutely right that there is very little attention being paid where it should be, and I think it's changing. And I think one of the factors in that change is that translation is becoming a bigger and bigger force in literature.
I think that is a huge. In fact, I think that's a huge void in this entire thing of, because I keep getting this thing, why is your book not in Hindi, why is it not in Tamil, because this entire, I think it's almost like a vacuum where regional languages is a concern. Because the moment your book is translated into any vernacular language, I think the reach is enormous, A. And secondly, I think it actually adds to the flavor of the entire feeling of the book and the entire scenario. So, but the only problem I personally feel is that we do not have that many good translators. Because I think that the translator has to be good in English and the regional language. I think this entire gap between translating from English to the vernacular language and back. So, it is, of course, sort of closing the bridge, but there is a word. I mean, because I keep getting these, please get it translated in Bengali, keep getting translated. And okay, we tell the publishers, I think Westland does it. I think they immediately start translating it into 5 languages, 5 regional languages. I think that's a very, very good thing, because the reaction which I've got from my Karna's Wife, which is in Marathi, is a different, I mean, it's a different readership. It's a very, because I think the moment you write in English, it becomes a little more urban. But the moment you write in a vernacular language, it reaches right to not only the smallest towns, the villages. You'll find it at a railway station. Your books are there and they're being read. I think, and those people coming and talking to you, I think that makes a huge difference, because it has percolated right down. So
I think more than English to other languages, the thing we really need is language to language. Because, I mean, let's face it, the English language gets its readership. There are enough ways to promote it. There are enough ways for it to become pan-Indian. Whereas your language from, say, Tamil to Malayalam or Tamil to Marathi is something that for some reason we are doing less and less of. And that would really enrich the conversation, is my feeling. But I'm going to ask you to say something about it.
Sure. Before I move to that point, which I believe is very, very valid and much needed, one quick observation. When I said Indic civilization and thought, I did not necessarily mean Hindu. I am a poet, a published poet myself. My first book was a poetry anthology in English, which I wrote as I was recovering from a near-fatal accident. It was self-published too. And the book title is Soul Call of Love and More, a tribute to Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So love is a universal feeling. I don't think there's anything Hindu about it. I was a part of INDIC Author Network at that point of time. And it is due to the efforts of IAN that my book moved from Kindle to print. The second poetry anthology that I brought out is entitled Manas Patal. It's also self-published, and it's about a lot of themes, and not necessarily Hindu, that's one. The point I wanted to make there is that when I said excess, is that new voices might not necessarily get traditional publishers. Our intent is to ensure that we create success stories and case studies of new voices for traditional publishers to take note. Because let's be very honest, and I'm a marketer professionally, why should a traditional publisher take up a new author if they don't have that idea about the return that will be on investment? So our job is to ensure that we create success stories which you can take up. So the idea is to create an enablement. When I met you outside, when I said we are going to be friends, that is what I meant. We intend to actually occupy a strategic position in the publishing ecosystem so that it's a win-win for all. Coming back to the point that Karthika raised, yes, I believe there is a lot of scope for inter-language translation. So also at CIW, we are not just publishing or promoting authors in English. As I said, we've brought out a book of satire in Hindi. We are promoting Shefali ji's work, which is in Marathi. Our next book is a book of Telugu poetry. Unfortunately, we are facing some challenges because of the script and all, so we've been approaching traditional and other publishers to beat that trend. So unless we are certain that the scripts that we have, so if we have to translate from Tamil to say Malayalam, or from Kashmiri to say Marathi, we need to be sure of all those technicalities at the back end. I mean, we recently attended a conference together, Publicon 2018 by Fiki, and this was one aspect that was definitely discussed, that unless that script issue is handled, this potential is there, but to tap it, we need to get the back end fixed. That's all.
I don't know how much time we have. We have to close, right? So that's all I'm going to say then. Thank you very much, panel, for telling us.
Thank you so very much. Tarun, if I may invite you back on stage.
Okay, इतनी तालियों से काम नहीं चलेगा. We've kind of seen बहुत ज़्यादा तालियां और बहुत ज़्यादा शोर उससे, okay? And keep it going for Saiswaroopa, Iyer, Shefali, Vaidya, Mayuresh, Didolkar, Dimple, Kaul. Keep it going, please. Kavita, Kane, and VK Karthika. Thank you so much.